Well, there's a new bunch of MPs now. Tonight, MPs and web experts are discussing the impact the web will have on politics, particularly over the next few months. The majority of MPs, government departments and millions of voters all able to connect through social media and blogs. Would something like this MPs' expenses scandal happen again? Well, joining us now from central London are two of the people organising the Parliament 2010 conference. David Brain is from PR agency Edelman and Andrew Walker is from Tweetminster, a site that tracks MPs on Twitter. Andrew, let's start with you. This informal contact then between MPs and their constituents that Twitter allows, is this a gimmick or do you think it's a valuable connection?
I think it's about rebuilding trust in the relationships that people have with MPs. You know, trust in politics is really low at the moment, especially since the expenses scandal. So it's very important that people can connect with politicians and ask them questions and that they're available to answer. I mean, ultimately, it's about making them more accountable.
Let's talk to David, if we may. The technology has a potential, David, I think you'd agree, to be a real game changer here, because both politicians and parties won't be able to control the message quite so easily, will they?
No, that's absolutely true. I think Twitter's in its early days. I think there's about 1.8 million Twitter users in the UK. There's 18 million, just to give you a sense of context, Facebook users. So it's quite small at the moment, but it is sort of the leading edge of this. I would call it the democratisation of politics, because not for the first time, but we're sort of re-engaging really with people from constituencies, from the grassroots, being able to make their feelings heard. So I think it is pretty much a leveller in that respect. And bear in mind as well that in the next few months, by May at the latest, we will have what I would call really our first digital election here in the UK. The US had that last year with the last election. We're going to have that for the first time here. And I think Twitter, Facebook and the other social media applications, and including blogging as well, will play a big role in that.
So there will be a bit of electronic heat, David. Do you think there'll be any more light, though?
I think there will be. Look, I mean, I don't think you're going to get an awful lot of policy discussed on Twitter, for example. You can't go into much detail in 140 characters, which, as you know, is what you've got with Twitter. But what you will get from that is connections between people who are interested in issues and communities who've got particular, interests. And so, yes, I think you will get quite a bit of light from that, but it won't necessarily, I think your first point, be the controlled light that the parties might want us to have all the time. I think we're arguably going to have the most interesting election, for decades, just because of the fact we're going to get this bottom-up democratisation of issues and coming together of communities and groups through the internet, through social media, that we've never had before.
Well, let's just tap into Andrew's experience here, because you've been doing this for a while, monitoring MPs and how they use Twitter and other social media. Now, is it working? Are they freer now, or do you think they still have the pager attached to their hip and they just tweet the line to take issued by the central office?
Well, I think it's important to look at the politicians that are using it well. They are off the leash, so to speak. I mean, parties need to get their messages straight, that's very important, but people also need to be able to hear the politician and what they really think and have a more open dialogue with them. We do know that those politicians that just tweet the party line and the same stories that come out in the press and on television, they don't get the same kind of traction. Whereas those politicians who are willing to answer questions and also participate in debates, it's very important to remember that if you're taking part in a debate, you also crystallise and mobilise a lot of activity around the conversations you're having. I mean, certainly we've seen with the Trafigura scandal that happened earlier this year, and also with the responses to Jan Moor's article, there is a very clear case for the politicians, A, being accessible, B, asking questions, but C, also being part of a much wider community that are debating the issues that affect national politics. So it's certainly a very effective mechanism to make things happen.
So, Andrew, do you think the next election, which has a certain timetable to it, they used to have morning news conferences, didn't it? We would be there as a rolling news channel. That would sort of set the debate until something else happened, somebody threw a punch maybe. But do you think all that is now going to be wiped out and it'll be a different dynamic at play during the next election campaign?
Well, it's certainly not going to be wiped out. You know, the important thing to remember with these tools is that they're here to add to the current arsenal of tools that politicians have to reach the public and engage with them. But I think we'll certainly see a lot more stories breaking on Twitter, and we'll see a lot more events that are captured by the public with flip cams, with Twitter, with uploads to websites. We'll see a lot more of those events taking place and getting covered when previously they'd have been missed by the press.
So finally, David, let's just ask you, amidst all this added stuff going on, will anyone get that one voice heard? Or do you think it is going to be rather more chaotic and perhaps more difficult to get a message from person to person?
I don't think there'll be one voice heard, and I think that's a good thing. I mean, I think there'll be a cacophony of voices, but I don't think we will all hear everything. I think what is increasingly happening with the internet is that we are beginning to self-select. We are finding communities of interest. We are, through the infinite capabilities of search, being able to hone in on the different subject matters that are of interest to us. And because increasingly people have communities of friends that they are following on Facebook or on Twitter or any other, Bebo or MySpace, any other social media group, we are being, what we read and what we're being exposed to is increasingly being selected by the group of friends that we select. So I don't think, and I think it's a good thing, that the one voice, one message, one control form of politics will be with us for much longer.
David Brain and Andrew Walker speaking to us from Westminster. Thank you both very much indeed. Now,